Good morning to all. This morning we're going to take a look at the visit of the Magi, the adoration of the Magi. And just as an introduction, when I spoke last time, I told you the 3 points I was going to make right off, and then we carried them through the lesson. And I'd like to draw your attention to this picture by Hieronymus Bosch. It was painted in late 15th century, about the time that Columbus was making his journeys here to North America. And there are only a few things I want to draw out. Hieronymus Bosch was an Orthodox Christian. He was a conservative Christian. And in his paintings, he always tried to display many lessons, all related directly to the Bible. And the first thing I want to point out that the very center point of history, the very center point of Hieronymus Bosch, and the very center point of us all should be the babe. We see the Christ child in the center of this painting. And it is not at all historically accurate. He did not want it to be accurate. He did not mean it to be accurate. He meant it to teach many stories. But we're only going to look at 3 points right here. First of all, if you notice behind Mary and behind Jesus, there is nothing. This is the pre-Christian world. Before Christ came into the world, really all the philosophy, all the wisdom really doesn't matter. Now, a quick medieval art lesson. Surrounding the child is something known as the circle of divine influence. So imagine a clock going around here, and we're just going to focus on the Magi. At 2 o'clock, you will notice the first wise man, the first Magus, and he represents Asia. He's wearing, you may not be able to see it, a turban and a crown. He's not looking at Jesus. He is maybe a rival of Jesus. He's maybe hostile to Jesus. You get to 3 o'clock and you'll notice an African wise man. And he's proud and he's rather haughty. You may not be able to see it that well. He is at least looking at Jesus. And he has a crown a little bit ornate than the headgear worn by the first Magus. But finally, when you get to at around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, you will notice this Magus, this wise man, he has taken his crown off and he's thrown it on the ground and he is kneeling before the Christ child. So he's worshiping him. And these are the 3 responses that we're going to see in the lesson this morning, the 3 responses that people have to the Christ. Just for a freebie, at 6 o'clock, you'll notice a white hunting hound. The picture isn't entirely there. This, in medieval art, symbolizes the fact that all people must pursue Christ. We must be relentless in our hunt and our search for Christ. Just as a hound will hunt that prey until he catches it, we must continue to search for the Christ child. And at 7 o'clock, you will notice a hermit. He's wearing green clothes. They're nowhere near as ornate or as complex as those of the wise men, of the Magi. Green is a symbol of the best color of all. That's why the panoply above Mary and Jesus is green as well. And he only has one thing, a simple silver coin, but he tosses that down. That's his homage to the Christ child. And you'll notice, unlike the Magus, he's leaning on a cane. So he cannot rely on his own strength. He needs to rely on God to support him. Now, the last point that I really do want to show you, in medieval art, at the 11 o'clock hour, you will notice a door. You may not see it too well, but that door is barred. There are horizontal and vertical bars, and that represents wisdom. These are wise men, but all their wisdom, all their philosophy will not get them to, in the very background, the New Jerusalem. So by default, you have to go to the center of the picture. Salvation, the hope of getting into the New Jerusalem, is only found in the Christ child. And if you look at the Christ child, you may not be able to see it too well. He's alert. He's not sleeping, and his hand, it's like he is in control of the situation, because Jesus is the only man born who planned to be born. As God the Son, the plan was already there that he would come to this world. And Bosch wants to remind us of this fact. So just keep these three responses. The first is of rivalry or maybe even hostility. The second is indifference. He's more interested in himself. But the third is the worshiping of the Christ. And that's where we should be, possibly, or not possibly, definitely we should be on the other side of that hound. We should be the poor people that are offering our sincere worship because he is a believer in the Christ, whereas these others have just come because they've heard about him. So let's take a look at Matthew 2. And we're going to look at Matthew 2, 1 to 12 this morning. And just as if you looked at that picture, and you may not have understood it until somebody explains it, we're going to take a look at this passage, and we do not understand it because we're 2,000 years beyond when this occurred. But it starts out, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men or Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. We're going to pause right there. Okay, so there's a king in Jerusalem, Herod. What does, big deal, what does this really mean? Well, in the very first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew gives a lengthy genealogy, and he talks about Joseph, and Joseph has come from David. And as you go down through this, he comes in verse 12, after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah, and then he talks about Jeconiah and how Jeconiah is the great-great-grandfather to Joseph. What the Jewish people knew at the time was that Jeconiah was the last king, and he was always going to be the last king because he was cursed. In Jeremiah, it was said of Jeconiah that no members of his bloodline would ever be again. So we get down to Joseph. Joseph has the legal right to be the king of the Jews. Herod is the king of the Jews, not Joseph, because Joseph could not do it. His line was cursed. But when we get down to verse 16, we see that Joseph is listed as the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. So Jesus, being the son of Joseph, the adopted son of Joseph, has the legal right to become the king. But because he's not of that bloodline, he is not got the curse upon him. It sounds a little bit confusing, but the Jews understood this perfectly well. So why is Herod the king? Well, there's another prophecy given back in Genesis by Jacob. And Jacob was prophesying about all of his sons. And he said, Judah, the scepter will never part from your hand. You will be the ruler. You will be the king over your brothers until somebody comes along who's not of your tribe. And when that happens, when somebody rules who is not from Judah, that's when the one to whom tribute is due is going to be born. That's when the Messiah is going to come. Herod was the first of the king of the Jews who is not a Jew. And the Jews at the time would understand this. There was a great warfare going on at the time, civil war, and Octavian, who was the nephew of Julius Caesar, finally was able to gain control, and he became Augustus Caesar. And he appointed Herod, an Idumean, as the king of the Jews. So Herod is the first non-Jewish king of the Jews, with that title, official king of the Jews. Going back to the prophecy with Jacob, they knew that once it passes out of the hands of Judah, that's when the Messiah is going to come. And they know this now when they're looking at this history of Joseph. Well, yeah, Joseph's got that legal right, but he's not the father of Jesus. He's the husband of Mary. So something very special is going on here. Now, furthermore, we get these wise men from the east. And we have to understand these Magi are a very special set of people. It's not like they're a day or two on the other side of the Jordan River. No, the Magi were priests. They followed the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster as we know him. And this was not the official religion of the Persians or the Achaemenids. They didn't have an official religion. They were very tolerant which is why the Jewish people got along well with the Persians, but they did not get along with the Romans. So they knew about the Magi, and Daniel had been with wise men in Babylon. Well, they were not the Magi. It was the Persians who had the Magi. And once the Babylonians fell, then the Persians took over and the Magi became the advisors, and Daniel was kept on. So he had also prophesied, and the Magi probably listened to him, and they had this in their writings, that there was going to be a Messiah. There was going to be a great ruler and a leader who's going to come from Judea. And the people in the first century all understood this. We don't understand it. It's been lost for the most part. Now, even the Roman historians, Suetonius and Tacitus, talked about the fact that there was going to be a ruler, a savior of the world, and he was going to come from Judea. And they may have picked up this idea because the Jews, after the Babylonian captivity, they were spread all over the world. And there were many synagogues in major cities throughout the world. And by the first century BC, people were starting to become really disillusioned with the pagan gods. And some of them started to visit the synagogues. They were really intrigued that there's one true creator God. And these Jewish people, they follow him and they believe in him. And they were picking up the ideas from the Jewish people. They truly were becoming witnesses for God finally. But they didn't want to totally become Jews, which is why Paul always went to the synagogues, and he would find these pagans who were casting off these ideas about these false gods, and they were interested. But that's another story. The Magi, the point is, are interested very much in these prophecies. And these Magi, the Greeks didn't really understand them. They said, oh, they're just a bunch of sorcerers and they deal with fire. Well, in Zarathustra's religion, they did worship fire. They did have worships on mountains with fire. But they were more about that. They were more the scientists. They were the advisors. They were astronomers. And astronomy and astrology were linked together back in those times. And in the zodiac, for whatever reason, Pisces was dedicated to Jews. And so if you saw something happen in the constellations of Pisces in that part of the sky, in that zodiacal part of the sky, then that meant that something was happening in Judea. And so these Magi, with their nightly studyings, they have seen something happen in the constellation of Pisces. They say it is a star. And going back to Johannes Kepler, 450 years ago, he was very much interested in this because he saw a conjunction. 3 planets came together and they looked like a bright star. And then there was a supernova. And so he puzzled and he wondered, what did the Magi see? Johannes Kepler, Brian will like this because he likes scientists. He was a Christian. And he also believed, and he was trying to study science and how this fits together with the Creator. So whatever the Magi saw, they knew scientifically, they knew that the time had come, that Daniel fellow, his prophecies, this star in the sky, the king has finally come. He's finally arrived. And so they come to Jerusalem, now the reestablished capital of the people of the Jews. And they ask, where is he who's been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. We have come to worship him. This indicates that they believed there was something divine about this being that was born, about this babe that has now come. Now imagine them. They're wise. They're the consultants to kings. People come to see them when they want wisdom. They come to Jerusalem. They expect to find the same type of people in Jerusalem. They expect that now everybody must know about the birth of this child, because it would take them maybe 20 days, maybe 30 days to travel. Persian roads were very good, but you still could only travel 15 to 20 miles to get over here. So they've traveled for maybe a month, and they get here and they're looking around for the celebrations, for people to be happy, to be joyful. Where is the king? And nobody knows. They're actually disturbed. They're bothered under Herod that these people, these foreigners, these Magi have all of a sudden come. And I should clear up something. There are not 3. We do not know how many. Now, the Romans loved the idea of the Magi because these were Gentiles who have discovered the Christ. And so we see in catacombs all kinds of paintings about the Magi. And sometimes there are only two, sometimes there are many as 8. Just from 3 gifts, they assume that there are 3. But there were a lot more than that. And even though they were traveling on Persian roads, the Achaemenid Empire had fallen. There were still bandits. So they would need their guards. They would need their retainers. So this was probably a fairly large crowd of people that have come. And they are looking for the celebration and they find nothing. This is really amazing that they come here and nobody seems to know anything about it. Of course, people did know about it. The shepherds saw it, and perhaps rumors came, but who's going to listen to a bunch of shepherds? And then there was Simeon and there was Anna in the temple, but who's going to listen to these old people? Well, yeah, you know, there were a lot of ideas about Messiah coming around. And we see even in the Gospels that there were false messiahs who would come around. So they really don't know. And they're bothered because this legation of high-class men from the east has come, and they're saying that the king has been born. Now, Herod especially did not like this. He was a nasty fellow. He killed one of his wives. He killed some of his kids, some of his sons. He was very jealous, very nasty, very suspicious. And again, people in the first century knew this. And as soon as you hear about Herod being disturbed, they would understand what's going on here. And all of Jerusalem is troubled because you cannot trust Herod. What's he going to do next? What does he do? He assembles the chief priests. And they get together and he asks them, where is this Christ going to be born? Christ is the rival. Herod has hostility towards him and he wants to cut off whatever rival he might have. And I want you to notice when we get to verse 5 and 6, this is what the chief priests are interpreting from Micah. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, that's where he's going to be born. For so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Now, the reason why I stress this, that the leaders are saying this is an interpretation of this passage, is that in the past century, liberal German theologians have come along and said, this doesn't really mean Jesus. It was just the Christians. Oh, there's the word Bethlehem. But no, the leaders of the Jews themselves, the priests, are saying, no, this is the proper interpretation of this passage. And it's not just that little quote that Matthew gives us. You have to actually take a look in Micah 5, and we're not going to do that for sake of time. But basically what he says, obviously there's a quote of that, but he says, this ruler's origin is of old. He's from ancient days. Micah may not have understood this, but here we have God the Son. He's ancient, he's eternal, and he is going to come. And when he does come, he will return the people of Israel to God. This is in verse 6. And he will be the shepherd to this flock. And he will make known the majesty, the name of the Lord his God. And they shall dwell secure to the ends of the earth. To the ends of the earth. This is important. This child is going to rule to the ends of the earth. Restoration, a shepherd to his flock. They will now be able to live in security. Things are going to be different when this child is born. And this is what these Jewish high priests and teachers are saying. But that's all they do. They say it, and then they vanish. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them at what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. Herod says this. Why are not these priests saying that? Why are they not asking them? Why are they not saying, hey, you've done all the hard work. You've traveled this far, this distance. We are coming with you. We are going to Bethlehem. Bethlehem was only about 6 miles away. So if traveling on a Persian road, you go 12 to 15 miles. This is like half a day's journey. It's not like 6 miles and you hop in your car. Okay, but still, would you not be excited if you were a priest and this is what you've been studying all your life and you've been teaching it? Do these guys not know about Micah and about Daniel? Sure, they do. They talk to the Magi and they tell them the right information. They're giving them the information that they need, but they don't go. So there we have the second man. He's indifferent. Yeah, they're looking at it, but you know, we're not opposed to this child. Oh, it's great if he comes, but why are they not going with him? They don't. Now, later on, we are going to realize that Herod is totally duplicitous here. He's lying. He doesn't want to go and worship the child. And he's not interested in when that star appeared. You know, so, oh, this is great. I can hand him my crown. Not at all. After listening to the king, they went on their way. The Magi are going on their way. So they are interested and they want to see this child. They've traveled for a month. And now, finally, after being a little bit puzzled that nobody in Jerusalem seems to know, they've got their answer. They're ready to move on to their next step of their journey. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. So again, they're interested in the heavens, and they see this star. And some people say, well, you know, maybe it was a meteor and it seemed to land over the house. We don't know. Maybe it was a special manifestation. The point is, to them, it meant something. They understood they were being given a signal. They were giving a sign. And they go and they find the child. Now, verse 10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Imagine that. Exceedingly rejoicing with great joy. That might seem a little bit redundant, but Matthew is trying to say their joy was so great. They were overwhelmed with joy. You cannot imagine the joy that they had when they saw that, when they knew they were about to find the person whom they were seeking. Exceedingly great joy. Now, when we see a little child, when we see a baby, that's thrilling, and that can make you laugh, and that can give you joy. Now, Jesus is already, we don't know how old he is, month, 2 months, 3 months, and they see this babe, and they know that he's the one who's been prophesied. I can't imagine, in my mind, I can only think, you know, what if the child looked at them, that focused at them? What if he grabbed their finger? They are so happy. They are so overjoyed to finally find the one who's going to make history. All history has pointed forward towards this child. He's going to save the world. His influence is going to spread. And you are there before he's even done anything. And you see the babe and you know what he's going to do. You know what he's going to be about. And they're filled with exceeding joy and they worship him. They fall down and worship him. That seems a little bit odd, you know, these high-class guys, and they fall down and they're worshiping this babe. And they open up treasures and they give him wonderful treasures. And this is probably the only time that Jesus in his life was rich, that he was wealthy. They give him gold, frankincense, and myrrh, all kinds of gold. He's a king, he's a priest, he's the leader, he's the ruler. And they give this to him. And it has been said about the myrrh that this is a little bit sad because myrrh was used to embalm bodies. And maybe that's foreshadowing his death. They may not have even realized it when they were giving that to him. And the frankincense, sweet smell during worship, they give it to him and they worship him. And then, being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So God is talking to them through the heavens, the signs in the heavens, and in a dream, he also speaks to them. Now, worship. We see these Gentiles have come, and over the years, people have said, well, when we're going to make 3 wise men, we're going to make it represent all the peoples of the world. So you've got the Asian representative, you've got the African representative, and you've got the European representative. I guess today we'd have to have more from other continents, but the point is it's going to be universal. And universally, people want to come to Christ and they want to worship him. And it's the Gentiles that have come. It's not even the people to whom he came. Now, why is this? Throughout the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew is showing us that Jesus has come to his own and they've rejected him. Jerusalem, they don't even know he's been born. And when they do, they don't even want to go out and see him. So let's take a look at the application. We have three responses to the king. And the first one is Herod, because he wants to destroy him. Hostility. And we have a lot of people today. The majority probably of people are hostile to Jesus. Maybe on today, Christmas Day, okay, the cute babe, that's fine. But they're hostile for the most part. Why? Well, Herod wanted to be king and he wanted to remain king. And people today want to be their own individual person. Nobody's going to tell me any rules. I'm going to do what I want, and I don't want anybody to put restrictions on me. So if Jesus says do this, I don't want to listen to him. People are hostile today. They were hostile when Bosch made his painting 500 years ago, and they were hostile when Matthew wrote this gospel and when Jesus was born. That's the primary response of human beings to Jesus. Hostility. And sometimes it changes, sometimes it remains. The second response was the response of the priests, the Jewish priests. They knew his teachings. They had it embedded in them. Everybody goes to them for the answers, and they will give them the right answer. But where is their conviction? There is none. They are indifferent. Zero action. They don't want to go and find the king. It would have been easy. These Magi had made that journey all those days, all those weeks, and these guys won't spend half a day to go down to Bethlehem and find him. They just don't care. And that's like a lot of people today who are maybe religious, maybe not. They're mildly interested in Jesus. And we really saw this, and we still see it, with the influence of German liberal theologians. They came up with all these naturalistic ideas, and they want to cut out all the miracles from the Bible, and they're mildly interested in Jesus, and they can tell you church history, but really beyond that, they're indifferent. That's the second response. So you can know the news and nothing happens. They produce no fruit. But the third response, this is what we want to be. We want to be filled with joy, exceeding joy. We want to fall down and worship. We want to offer our best to the King. After trials, the trials of the road, the trials of life, we don't want to give up. We want to keep on going. And if we don't get the answer, if we get an obstacle, we want to be like that white hound that's pursuing Christ and give him the best when we find it. When you worship something, that means you're declaring that that is special. People worship objects, or people worship people, and celebrities or whatnot. They want to give the best when they see them or when they have whatever. And that's what we want to do. We want to go the distance, and we want to submit to Christ. Give him our lives. And that is the essence of worship. And that's what these Magi did. And that's what we will do today if we are wise. So sum it up. Herod, he thinks if there is a new king, I can't do what I want anymore. I've lost power. I've lost control. The leaders of the Jews, they just don't care. They're indifferent. Worship him if you want. I may or may not. But what God wants really is worship, true worship. And what is that worship that he expects from Christians? Well, Paul sums it up very nicely in Romans 12. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So we don't have gold, we don't have frankincense, we don't have myrrh, we have our lives. And this is what we must dedicate to God, to the Christ child, to the Savior of the world. True worship, this is what he wants of us. What is your response? Don't be like Herod. Don't be like the Jewish leaders. Be like the Magi and worship him and offer him your best. Thank you.